What if the most powerful figure in Western religion, the devil himself, the supreme adversary, the fallen angel of light, was constructed on a single word, one Latin word, written by a monk in a cave in Bethlehem in the 4th century, translating a Hebrew poem about the death of a Babylonian king? What if the name Lucifer appears exactly once in the entire Bible, in one verse, in one chapter of Isaiah, and that verse has nothing to do with a fallen angel at all? What if every painting of the morning star falling from heaven, every theological treatise about the Prince of Darkness, every sermon about the adversary of God, all of it traces back to a translation choice made by one man, Jerome, who was working with a text that predates Christianity by 7 centuries, describing a political enemy of ancient Israel. Picture this. It is around the year 383 CE. Jerome is in a stone cave outside Bethlehem, surrounded by scrolls, translating the Hebrew scriptures into Latin, what will become the Vulgate, the official Bible of the Western Church for over 1,000 years. He comes to Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. The Hebrew reads, Helel ben Shachar, the shining one, son of the dawn, a poetic metaphor for the king of Babylon, whose pride soared as high as the morning star, and whose fall was as sudden as dawn swallowed by daylight. Jerome writes, Lucifer. He does not know, or perhaps he does know, and the question of which is more unsettling, that this single word will become the name of the devil, that within a century, the church fathers will attach it to Satan, that within a millennium, it will be the title of a supreme fallen angel whose rebellion against God explains the existence of evil itself, that within 2,000 years, it will appear on album covers and television series in the literature of a religious movement built in its name. From one word, one translation, one verse about a dead Babylonian king. But here is what Jerome did not have in front of him, or what he may have chosen to set aside. Texts older than his translation, texts older than the New Testament, texts that told a completely different story about fallen stars, about cosmic rebellion, about the origin of evil in the universe. The Book of Enoch. Today, we are going to do something that makes certain theologians deeply uncomfortable. We are going to read the story of the fallen morning star the way it was told before Jerome got his hands on it. We are going to go back to the original Hebrew, to the Babylonian astronomical tradition that shaped it, to Enoch's shattering vision of stars falling from heaven. And we are going to ask a question that has been sitting unanswered at the edge of biblical scholarship for decades. What if the Lucifer we inherited is not the Lucifer of the ancient tradition? What if the real story of the fallen morning star was buried in Enoch, and what replaced it was a theological invention, elegant, politically useful, and built on a mistranslation? Let's begin where everything begins, with the text itself, Isaiah 14, verse 12. In most English Bibles, derived from the Latin Vulgate tradition, it reads something like this: How you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. Now pause on that. It sounds cosmic. It sounds like a war in heaven. It sounds like exactly the kind of verse you would build an entire theology of a fallen angel around. But look at what comes immediately before it and immediately after it. Isaiah 14 is a taunt song. It is a political poem. It is the ancient Near Eastern equivalent of a propaganda broadsheet written to celebrate the defeat of a tyrant. The scholars call it a mashal, a proverb, a mocking poem, and it is addressed explicitly in the text itself to the king of Babylon, not to an angel, not to a supernatural being, to a human king whose empire had enslaved Israel and who had just, or was about to, fall. The verses surrounding that famous line make this unmistakable. Isaiah 14:4 says, "In plain language, you will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon." Then comes the poem, the great king's pride, his boast that he would ascend to heaven and set his throne above the stars of God, his claim to be like the Most High. And then the fall. The shining one, son of the dawn. This brilliant blazing figure is cut down and descends to the realm of the dead. The Hebrew Helel ben Shachar is beautiful language. Helel comes from the root halal, meaning to shine, to gleam, to radiate light. Ben Shachar means son of the dawn. This is the morning star, the planet Venus, which appears before sunrise, blazing brilliantly at the edge of the horizon, then disappears as the sun rises. In the ancient Near East, this astronomical phenomenon was loaded with meaning. The morning star appeared in its glory, seemed to challenge the sun itself, and then vanished. It was the perfect metaphor for hubris, for a king who thought himself divine, for a power that soared and then was extinguished. So why did Jerome write Lucifer? Here is where the debate becomes genuinely fascinating. Lucifer is Latin, and it simply means light bearer. It was used in classical Latin as a name for the morning star. Virgil uses it, Ovid uses it, Pliny uses it. When Jerome translated Helel ben Shachar as Lucifer, he was, in one sense, making a linguistically defensible choice. He was rendering a Hebrew metaphor about the morning star into its Latin equivalent. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures made a few centuries earlier, had translated the same phrase as Hierosphoros, the dawnbringer, also a name for Venus. Jerome's Lucifer is in that same tradition. But here is the problem. By the 4th century, Lucifer was not a neutral word in Christian theological circles. It was already being used by Origen, by Tertullian, to describe the fallen angel who had rebelled against God. Jerome was not translating into a blank vocabulary. He was translating into a tradition that was actively building a theology of a supreme fallen being. Whether he knew the freight that word carried, whether he intended to attach it to Satan, whether this was a translation or a theological statement, scholars argue about this still. What is not arguable is the result. Jerome wrote Lucifer, and within a generation, Augustine and other church fathers had made the identification explicit. The Lucifer of Isaiah 14 was Satan. The king of Babylon was merely a type, a symbol, an earthly reflection of the cosmic original. The real subject of the poem was the devil's primordial fall from heaven, of which the Babylonian king's fall was just a pale historical echo. This interpretive move, taking a political poem about a human tyrant and reading it as a cosmic myth about a fallen angel, is what scholars call typological exegesis. And it is both intellectually sophisticated and, when you look at the original text, extraordinarily audacious. You are not reading what Isaiah wrote. You are reading what Augustine decided Isaiah meant to mean. You are importing a theology into a text that does not contain it, and then citing that text as evidence for the theology. Does that make Jerome a villain? Not necessarily. Does it make Augustine one? Also not necessarily. They were working within a tradition with a set of theological needs, trying to explain a world in which evil seemed very real and very powerful. But it does mean that the Lucifer you know, the supreme fallen angel, the adversary of God, the proud rebel cast from heaven, is, at his theological foundations, built on a reading of a Hebrew poem about a dead Babylonian king. A reading that is, at minimum, contested, and a reading that might have been constructed precisely because someone needed it to be true. Here is the microhook hiding inside all of this. If the Isaiah passage is about a human king, where did the ancient tradition about fallen supernatural beings actually come from? Because it did exist. It predated Jerome. It predated the Church Fathers. It predated, arguably, the New Testament itself. And it came from a text that never quite made it into the official canon. The Book of Enoch is one of the strangest, most dramatic, most theologically explosive texts in the ancient world. It claims to record the visions and journeys of Enoch, the man described in Genesis as someone who walked with God and was not, for God took him. A man who, according to tradition, never died, who was taken bodily into heaven, who saw things that human eyes were not supposed to see. The text we call 1st Enoch is actually a composite work, assembled across several centuries, roughly from the 3rd century BCE through the 1st century CE. Parts of it were known to the authors of the New Testament. Jude quotes it directly. Parts of it were revered by the early Christian community at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scroll community, who preserved multiple copies of it. And yet it was ultimately excluded from the canonical scriptures of both Judaism and most branches of Christianity. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, it remains canonical to this day. In the Western tradition, it became a kind of theological underground, too powerful to ignore, too complex to officially endorse. What Enoch describes about fallen beings is radically different from what Jerome would later write into Isaiah 14. And it is almost certainly older. The key section for our purposes is what scholars call the animal apocalypse, found in chapters 85 through 90 of 1st Enoch. This is one of the most remarkable pieces of ancient visionary writing in existence. In it, the entire history of humanity from creation to the eschaton is told through the metaphor of animals. Humans are animals, bulls, sheep, wild beasts. The angels are stars. And in chapter 86, something extraordinary happens. Enoch looks up at the sky, and he sees stars falling from heaven. Not one star, not a single proud rebel hurled down in defeat. Multiple stars, a community of them, descending not because they were cast out, but because they chose to come down. Now stop there and hold that image for a moment, because what follows in the text is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in all of ancient literature. According to the traditions built around and within the Enochic texts, there was a gathering, 200 beings of light, standing at the summit of a mountain, Mount Hermon, the great peak at the northern edge of the Promised Land, whose very name in Hebrew derives from the word for sacred oath. 200 stars at the edge of heaven, looking down at the world below, at the daughters of men, at physical creation, at flesh and blood and warmth and mortality, at everything they were not. And they made an oath, together, each one committing to the others, because each one knew that what they were about to do could not be undone, that there was no returning from what they intended, that they were standing at the last possible moment before the irrevocable. They descended anyway, not cast down, not defeated, not expelled. They left. They abandoned their appointed tracks in the celestial order, the paths they had been given, the orbits that defined their nature, and they came down into the world of dust and desire and time, because something about the human world called to them with a force that the ordered perfection of heaven could not answer. The leader of the Watchers is named Shemihaza in some traditions, Azazel in others. He is not given the name Lucifer. He is not described as proud. He is described as afraid of what they are doing, afraid of bearing the blame alone, and it is his companions who reassure him. We will all share this. We swore an oath together. Whatever judgment comes, it comes to all of us. This is the original story of fallen celestial beings in the ancient Hebrew tradition. Not a war in heaven, not a throne challenged, not a single magnificent rebel screaming his defiance at God. 200 beings who loved something they should not have loved, who wanted something they were not made to have, who descended together in full knowledge of the cost, and who bore the consequences as a community. That is the tradition Jerome did not have, or chose not to use. Here's the question this raises. If the Enochic tradition is older than Jerome, if the Book of Enoch predates the Vulgate by at least 4 centuries, then which is the original tradition of fallen celestial beings? Is it the Watchers of Enoch, or is it the single proud adversarial Lucifer of Augustine? Did the Church Fathers replace a complex, ambiguous, multiple tradition with a simpler, more useful singular devil, and then retrofit that singular devil back onto Isaiah 14? The scholarly answer, increasingly, is yes. That is more or less what happened. And to understand why it happened, you need to understand what theological problem the figure of Lucifer was invented to solve. But before we get there, one more detail from Enoch demands attention. Because there is something in the star imagery that has not yet been said, something that connects directly to the paradox at the heart of everything we are examining. In the ancient astronomical tradition, the planet Venus, the morning star, the star of dawn, was understood to be unique among celestial objects. Unlike fixed stars, it moved. Unlike the sun, it appeared sometimes in the morning before sunrise, and sometimes in the evening after sunset. To ancient observers, it seemed to die and be reborn, to descend below the horizon and return, to be both the morning star and the evening star. A being with 2 modes of appearance, 2 faces, 2 natures. The Babylonians associated this with Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, who descended into the underworld and rose again. The Greeks called the morning star Phosphoros and the evening star Hesperus, and it took centuries before they understood it was the same object. The Hebrews knew it as Helel, the shining one, a star that descends, a star that returns, a star that is light in the darkness before dawn. Does that remind you of anyone? Does that description of a figure who descends, who is of the nature of light, whose very name means the bringer of dawn, resemble any other figure in the tradition? We will come back to this. Because the paradox hiding at the center of all this is the most astonishing thing in the entire story. Say the word Satan to almost anyone in the Western world, and they know immediately what you mean. The adversary, the enemy of God and humanity, the supreme evil, being whose rebellion against heaven explains the existence of suffering in a world created by a good God. The figure with the red skin and the horns, or the figure with the blazing beauty and the broken wings, depending on which tradition you're drawing from. Everyone knows who Satan is. Now here's the thing that changes everything. Satan is not a name. It is a job title. In the original Hebrew, the word is ha-Satan, with the definite article ha, meaning the. You do not put a definite article in front of a proper name. You do not say the Michael or the Gabriel. The article signals a role, a function, a position. Ha-Satan means the adversary, the accuser, the one who opposes. It is a description of what this figure does in the divine court, not who this figure is. And the divine court is exactly where we find him. In the book of Job, one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew scriptures, the figure called Ha-Satan appears not as an enemy of God, but as a member of God's council. He is one of the Bene Elohim, the sons of God, the heavenly assembly. He moves about the earth and reports back. He is given explicit permission by God to test Job. He functions as a celestial prosecutor, the being whose role in the cosmic legal structure is to challenge, to probe, to push back against easy declarations of human virtue. He is, in the most precise sense possible, a bureaucrat, a divine civil servant with an adversarial brief, not the enemy of the system, part of the system. Let that land. The figure who became the supreme embodiment of evil in Western civilization, the being against whom the entire salvific drama of Christianity is staged, the adversary whose defeat is the point of the crucifixion and resurrection, the enemy whose name has been used to justify inquisitions and crusades and the burning of anyone the institutional church found inconvenient. That figure began as a functionary, a celestial role player, a prosecutor who reported to God, operated within the divine order, and was kept on a very short leash. The Satan of the Hebrew Bible does not rebel. He does not challenge the throne. He does not lead a war in heaven. He does not fall. In Zechariah chapter 3, he appears in a vision to accuse the high priest Joshua before the divine court. And the Lord simply rebukes him. He is not expelled. He is not destroyed. He is just wrong about Joshua. And God says so. And that is the end of it. This is the original Satan, a legitimate, if uncomfortable, instrument of divine justice. A being with a function, not a nature. A role, not an identity. Something happened between this figure and the cosmic enemy of the New Testament. Something that transformed a legal functionary into the prince of darkness, the ruler of this world, the father of lies. The Enochic tradition is, many scholars argue, the missing link. But the transformation was not inevitable. It was a choice, a theological choice, made by specific people at a specific moment for specific reasons. And once you see it as a choice rather than a discovery, you cannot unsee it. The Enochic tradition gave early Judaism and nascent Christianity a framework for understanding cosmic evil that the canonical Hebrew scriptures simply did not provide. The Watchers explained why the world was so corrupt, why humanity was so prone to violence and idolatry, why suffering existed on such an overwhelming scale. The fallen stars had not just sinned themselves, they had taught humanity forbidden knowledge. The arts of war, of sorcery, of seduction, of metallurgy used for weapons. Azazel, in some versions, is held responsible for teaching humans how to kill each other. The corruption of the world is not primarily a human failure, it is the result of a celestial intrusion. Beings from above contaminated beings below. This is a powerful explanatory myth, but it has a structural problem from the point of view of emerging Christianity. The Watchers are multiple. They are ambiguous, fallen from desire, not from malice. Their leader is not clearly identified. Their story is diffuse, distributed across a community of fallen beings. What the theological tradition increasingly needed was a single adversary, a clear and definite cosmic enemy who could serve as the explanation for all evil, the counterpoint to God's goodness, the figure against whom the salvific act of Christ could be most dramatically staged. You can see this need crystallizing in the Church Fathers. Origen, writing in the 3rd century, makes the identification explicit. The Lucifer of Isaiah 14 is the devil. The "how you have fallen from heaven" is the record of Satan's primordial rebellion. The pride of the Babylonian king mirrors the pride of the fallen angel, because the king is consciously imitating, or being manipulated by, the original rebel. The earthly political taunt becomes a cosmic theological statement about the original fall. Tertullian, similarly, reads Isaiah 14 through a satanic lens. The ambition described in the poem, the desire to ascend above the stars of God, to set a throne on high, to be like the Most High, becomes the template for the devil's sin, pride, hubris, the desire to displace God. This is the sin that explains everything. The fall of Adam and Eve, orchestrated by the same being, the corruption of history, the need for redemption, and then Augustine. Augustine is where the theological architecture becomes the permanent building in which Western civilization will live for centuries. In The City of God, Augustine elaborates a full theology of the devil, a being of supreme beauty and intelligence, created good, who fell through pride before the creation of the physical world. This explains why the serpent was already there in Eden. The cosmic fall preceded the human one. Lucifer fell first, and his fall made human sin almost inevitable. What Augustine achieves is a theological system of extraordinary power and elegance. Evil has a single origin. It has a single agent. The randomness and multiplicity of the Enochic tradition, 200 watchers descended for love, corrupting the world through specific forbidden teachings, is replaced by one supreme rebel, whose sin is pride, and whose punishment is eternal enmity. The messiness of Enoch is resolved into the clarity of Lucifer. But at what cost? Consider what gets lost in the transition. The Watchers of Enoch are not simply evil. They are fallen, yes, but they loved, they wanted, they chose to descend into the world, into physical reality, because something about human life attracted them. There is something almost beautiful in that, and something that the church needed to suppress, because a tradition of angels who fall from love rather than pride is a very different tradition from one in which the devil falls from pride. Love is a moral complexity. Pride can be condemned cleanly. Love cannot. And the Watchers' forbidden knowledge, the arts and sciences and technologies they taught humanity, is not simply evil in Enoch's telling. It is dangerous. It is premature. It is knowledge humanity was not ready for. but it is knowledge. There is an ambivalence in Enoch about the Watchers that is entirely absent from Augustine's Lucifer. Enoch's fallen beings are tragic. Augustine's fallen angel is damned. The question the historian must ask is, was this theological simplification innocent? Was it inevitable? Or was it a choice? And if it was a choice, who benefited from it? There is a principle in the history of religion that might be called the economy of evil. Every society, every civilization needs an explanation for suffering, for injustice, for the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be. Different traditions have answered this question differently, with karma, with fate, with original sin, with the inscrutability of divine will. What the Western tradition chose, under the influence of the Church Fathers, was to personify the answer. Evil has a name, evil has a face, evil has an origin story, and that story is useful in ways that the Enochic tradition, with its 200 ambiguous fallen stars, simply could not be. A supreme adversary is theologically efficient. It explains everything in one move. Why there is sin, the devil introduced it. Why there is suffering, the devil orchestrated it. Why humanity is tempted, the devil engineers it. It is psychologically satisfying. There is an enemy. The enemy is real. And aligning with God means opposing the enemy. It is politically powerful. Those who oppose the church, who challenge orthodoxy, who practice rival religions, can all be aligned with the devil's project. Heresy is not merely wrong, it is diabolical. The Enochic tradition could not serve these functions as cleanly. 200 fallen watchers, each with their own story, their own motivation, their own specific corruption, teaching humanity specific things at specific times. This is not a theology that lends itself to a unified narrative of cosmic warfare between God and the devil. It is a theology of complexity, of multiple causes, of ambiguous origins. And complexity is the enemy of institutional power. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is something far more ordinary and far more human. People and institutions simplify because they must. Because complex narratives are harder to transmit, harder to teach, harder to use as tools of social organization. The Nicene Creed is short. The Apostles' Creed is short. The theology of the Church must be communicable to a peasant in a medieval field, to a child in a Sunday school, to a soldier about to go into battle. The devil made me do it is communicable. A community of 200 angelic beings descended from heaven out of desire for human women and taught forbidden arts, which corrupted civilization. Less so. But the suppression of Enoch was not purely organizational. There were theological reasons as well. The Book of Enoch's cosmology was, in certain respects, troubling to Orthodox Christianity. Its angels were too physical, too capable of desire, too fully agents of their own choices. Its universe was full of imprisoned stars and secret chambers, and divine machinery that operated semi-independently of God's direct will. It was, in short, not a universe in which God's sovereignty was absolute and clear. It was a universe with room for genuine cosmic disorder, not controlled opposition, as the Lucifer as devil figure ultimately is, but actual disorder, actual waywardness, actual fallen light that has not been fully contained. The canonical tradition resolves this problem with the figure of Lucifer. The devil is powerful, but limited. He can tempt but not compel. He can deceive but not destroy what God protects. He is, in a profound theological sense, on a leash. His rebellion was defeated. His power is borrowed time. His fall is already accomplished, not a present ongoing danger, but a concluded event whose consequences are being managed. The cosmic war is over. We are living through the final chapter. The Enochic tradition offers no such comfort. The fallen stars are imprisoned, yes, but the knowledge they imparted is not. The children of the Watchers, the Nephilim, the giants, the bodiless spirits released when the giants died, are not contained. They roam the earth. They are the spirits of the dead seeking to possess the living. This is a universe that is genuinely, irreversibly altered by the fall of the stars. It cannot be walked back. It can only be navigated. This is a harder theology to live inside, but there are those who argue it is a more honest one. And here is the moment we must ask the question that has been building since part 1. If Jerome's Lucifer was constructed on a mistranslation of a political poem, and if the theology built around it suppressed and replaced a more complex and ancient tradition, then what does the text that was suppressed actually tell us? What is the real shape of the morning star as Enoch understood it? Because here is the thing about the morning star that the entire tradition, from Isaiah to Enoch, to Jerome to Augustine to Milton, agrees on. It falls, and it still shines. We have arrived at what is perhaps the most extraordinary fact in this entire story. And it is not a discovery of modern scholarship. It is sitting in plain sight, at the very end of the Christian Bible, in the last chapter of the Book of Revelation, Revelation 22:16. Jesus is speaking. He says, "I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright morning star." The morning star. The same image, the same astronomical metaphor, the same phosphoros, the same Lucifer, the same Helel ben Shachar that Isaiah used for the pride-destroyed king of Babylon, that Jerome translated as the name of the devil, that Augustine elaborated into the title of the supreme fallen angel. Jesus Christ in the final pages of the New Testament calls himself by the same name as the devil. Let that settle for a moment. Because this is not a minor textual coincidence. The morning star is not a casual metaphor that happened to be used twice. It is the central image of both traditions. It is the name that was built into a theology of cosmic evil by 4 centuries of church fathers. And the risen Christ claims it for himself. Theologians have naturally worked extremely hard to explain this. The most common response is to draw a distinction between the true morning star and the false one. Jesus is the genuine morning star, the light that truly heralds the dawn, the arrival of divine salvation, the real thing of which Lucifer was a proud and failed imitation. Lucifer wanted to be the morning star, but was not. Jesus is the morning star in truth. The name belongs to Christ. It was stolen or aspired to by the fallen angel. This is a theologically coherent position, but it requires you to believe something very specific about the structure of the universe. That there is an original, true, divine version of a thing, and a counterfeit version that fell by trying to be that thing. Lucifer is the false morning star. Jesus is the real one. The similarity of the names is evidence of the devil's imitative ambition. But there is another way to read this, a way that does not resolve the paradox, but holds it open. The morning star is the last light before dawn. It appears at the darkest hour, not to replace the darkness, but to signal that dawn is coming. It is a transitional figure, a being of the threshold, neither fully the darkness of night nor fully the light of day. It appears because it is dark enough for it to be visible. Its brilliance depends on the darkness surrounding it. What if the two morning stars of the biblical tradition, the fallen one of Isaiah 14 and the risen one of Revelation 22, are not enemies but mirrors? What if the tradition is telling us something about the nature of light itself, that it always appears at the boundary between darkness and dawn, that it always involves a descent and a return, that the very thing that falls is the very thing that rises? This is the reading that the mystical and esoteric traditions within Christianity have always gravitated toward, and that the institutional tradition has always resisted for obvious reasons. Origen, before his eventual condemnation, flirted with a theology in which even Lucifer might ultimately be redeemed, a doctrine called apokatastasis, the universal restoration of all things. Gregory of Nyssa held similar views. The institutional church rejected this. The fallen angel must remain fallen, or the entire theological structure, the cosmic warfare, the need for salvation from the devil's power, the clarity of the moral universe, begins to wobble. But notice what the Enochic tradition suggests, without quite saying it. The fallen stars in Enoch are imprisoned, not destroyed. They are confined in a valley of fire, waiting for the day of judgment. They still exist. They still possess their original celestial nature. They have not been annihilated. They have been contained. And the text leaves open, at least implicitly, the question of what judgment will ultimately mean for them. This is not the theology of permanent damnation. This is the theology of the prisoner awaiting trial. And consider one more detail from Enoch that rarely gets discussed in this context. In the astronomical section of 1st Enoch, the Book of the Luminaries, Enoch is shown the machinery of the heavens by the angel Uriel. He sees the paths of the stars, the gates through which the sun and moon pass, the chamber in which light is stored. He is shown the order of the cosmos. And in that order, every star has an appointed track, an assigned path, a role in the great celestial concert. The fallen stars, the watchers, abandoned their assigned tracks. They left the paths they were given. They descended not because their tracks led downward, but because they chose to go off track. And the extraordinary thing is that Enoch describes this abandonment not merely as a sin, but as a disruption of cosmic music. The celestial order is harmonic. When stars leave their tracks, the harmony breaks. The world below registers this not as an invasion, but as a discordance. What does it mean to fall from your assigned place in the cosmic order? What does it mean to be a star that chose descent? And what does it mean that in the very last verse of the very last chapter of the Christian Bible, the one who promises to come again calls himself by the name of the star that fell? There is a moment in John Milton's Paradise Lost, published in 1667, when the theology of Lucifer had been fully settled for over 1,000 years, that every reader of the poem remembers. Satan, freshly fallen, surveys his new domain and delivers a speech that contains the most famous line Milton ever wrote. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Milton almost certainly did not intend this line to be sympathetic. He was a Protestant theologian, writing an epic meant to justify the ways of God to men. Satan is the villain. His pride is the engine of the fall. His grandeur is meant to be hollow. And yet, generations of readers, from William Blake onward, have found Satan more compelling than God in Milton's poem. Blake famously argued that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, that the creative, rebellious, suffering Satan was where the poetic vitality of the work lived, while the orthodox sovereign God was merely an authority figure. This is not a footnote in literary history. It is a symptom of something that the constructed Lucifer, for all its theological efficiency, could not finally contain: the human instinct to find complexity in the figure of the fallen one. Because what the construction of Lucifer suppressed: the ambiguity, the desire, the tragedy, the fallen light that did not go out, never fully disappeared. It went underground. It resurfaced in the Romantic tradition's rehabilitation of the rebel, in Blake's Urizen and Orc, in Shelley's Prometheus, who steals fire from heaven for humanity's benefit and suffers eternally for it, in Byron's Cain, who challenges God not out of pride, but out of moral outrage at suffering and injustice, in Goethe's Mephistopheles, who describes himself as part of that power which would ever do evil and does good. These are not simply Lucifer rebranded. They are the return of something older, something that sounds remarkably like the Enochic Watchers, beings of light who descended out of desire and love and are reaching toward the human. Beings whose fall is inseparable from their gift. Beings whose transgression and their grace are the same act. The modern rehabilitation of Lucifer, in the Satanic Temple's explicitly humanist theology, in the television series that casts him as a morally complex nightclub owner with a deep investment in justice, in the ambient cultural comfort with Luciferian imagery on everything from high fashion to metal album covers, is often read as secularization, as the progressive disappearance of religious belief, as postmodern irony applied to medieval theology. But there is another reading. The rehabilitation of Lucifer in modern culture may be, at least in part, the return of a suppressed tradition, the return of the Enochic complexity that Augustine locked away, the return of the morning star as a figure who is not simply evil, but genuinely ambiguous, who carries the contradiction of light and fall in the same nature. The Satanic Temple, notably, is not Satanist in any traditional theological sense. It does not believe in Satan as a being. It uses Lucifer as a symbol, the symbol of rational inquiry against superstition, of individual conscience against institutional authority, of the rebel who asks questions rather than obeying blindly. This is, in an ironic but precise way, closer to the Enochic Watchers than it is to the Augustinian devil, a being who chose to descend into the world, who brought knowledge at great personal cost, who was condemned by the heavenly authorities for the transgression. What does this tell us? It tells us that the theological construction of Lucifer, for all its power, for all its centuries of dominance, was always fighting against a deeper human intuition. The intuition that light and darkness are not simply opposed, that the figure who falls may also be the figure who illuminates, that the rebel is not simply the enemy of order, but sometimes the necessary disruption of an order that has become oppressive, that the morning star is neither fully darkness nor fully dawn, and that is precisely why it is visible. And it tells us something about the relationship between power and story. The story of Lucifer, the single, proud, defeated adversary of God, is an extraordinarily useful story for institutions that need to maintain control. It provides a clear enemy. It provides a clear criterion for heresy. It transforms complexity into simplicity, ambiguity into accusation. Anyone who challenges the authority of the institutional church can be aligned with the pride of Lucifer. Anyone who pursues forbidden knowledge can be tarred with the same brush. The figure of the fallen angel, in practice, has been one of the most effective tools of social and religious control in Western history. The Enochic tradition, by contrast, is not easily weaponized. 200 fallen watchers who descended for love, who taught forbidden arts, whose children populated the earth. This is a story that resists simple application to a political enemy. It is too distributed, too ambiguous, too sympathetic, in its strange way, to the transgressive impulse. Perhaps this is why it was suppressed. Or perhaps the relationship between the two traditions is simpler and stranger than a conspiracy of suppression. Perhaps the Enochic tradition was marginalized not because it was false, but because it was too close to the truth, too close to the real experience of celestial ambiguity, of light that falls, of wisdom that corrupts, of desire that reaches across a cosmic boundary and brings ruin and illumination in the same motion. The star that fell in Enoch's vision was still a star. It landed and something began, not extinction, not simple evil, something more complicated than either, the world we live in. And at the end of the Bible, in the last chapter of Revelation, the risen Christ, the one who descended into death and returned, who is described in the opening of that same book as the first and the last, the one who was dead and is alive, calls himself the bright morning star. Not the sun, not the sovereign light of high noon, the morning star, the last light before dawn, the star that is visible only because the night is still deep enough to see it, the star that appears at the darkest hour, not to end the darkness, but to signal what is coming. Isaiah's Helel was a star that climbed toward heaven and fell. Enoch's watchers were stars that chose to descend. Jerome's Lucifer was a translation that became a theology. Augustine's devil was a theology that became a civilization. And at the end of all of it, in the last book of the canon that contains all of this, the figure who is supposed to have defeated the morning star turns to the reader and says, "That is my name too." There is no clean resolution to that. Theologians have tried for 2,000 years, and the paradox does not close. What it does is open something. It opens the question of whether the story you were handed, the story of the single proud rebel, the supreme adversary, the devil whose fall explains all evil, and whose defeat is the point of everything, was ever the whole story. Or whether it was a story someone needed. A story that served specific people, in specific institutions, at specific historical moments. A story that replaced something older and stranger and harder to weaponize. The watchers chose to descend. They swore an oath together on a mountain at the edge of heaven, and they came down into a world of flesh and time and consequence. Whether their descent was sin or love, or both simultaneously, the text does not resolve it cleanly, and maybe that is the point. The world we live in, with all its beauty and all its corruption, with all its forbidden knowledge and all its uncontainable desire, is partly the world their descent made. If the devil you inherited was built on a mistranslation, then what you inherited was not the truth of the tradition, it was someone's management of the tradition. And the tradition itself, older, stranger, more luminous and more dangerous, is still there. In Enoch, in the oath at Mount Hermon, in the star that fell and did not go out. In the last verse of the last chapter, where the one who rose from the dead looks directly at you and tells you his name is the morning star. You were never meant to stop at that verse and keep reading, but here you are,